would like to look at the doc share, it's going to be there in chat. Opponents will share case before we give constructive. We would appreciate if you would do the same. Thank you.
Okay, app is in. I can get started if everybody's ready. All right, I'll start time on my first word. Time starts now. We affirm contention one is wait times high. Technology surveillance greatly reduces wait times at the U.S. southern border, helping the economy. Border wait times are only getting longer as Fry 24 states that lines stretch for several hours, frustrating 150,000 who daily cross from Mexico. In San Diego, wait times are going up, not down. Waits regularly take 3 to 4 hours. Border communities that lose $2 billion yearly because of wait times. Empirically, non-intrusive tech has decreased wait times and saved money, as Perez 24 states that in the fiscal year 2022, NAI technology CBP cut examination times from 2 hours down to 8 minutes. That effort saved $1 billion in operational costs and $17.5 billion from delays. Unfortunately, non-intrusive scanning tech will also, or fortunately, non-intrusive scanning tech will also decrease wait times, as Rivera 24 states that this will be X-ray technology that will improve the flow of traffic and crossing times as they decrease. Chavez 23 furthers that a more efficient US-Mexico border has the potential to reduce border crossing times for commercial and non-commercial vehicles. A 10-minute reduction in wait times can create thousands of Mexican jobs, grow the domestic product or GDP of several Mexican states, and generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in new spending within the United States. Let's go into the specifics for the impact. Chavez 23 furthers that increasing border security and efficiency by 10 minutes can result in more than 3,000 additional jobs across Mexico's 6 border states while increasing their combined GDP by 1.34%. A $2.2 billion increase in GDP, which this 1.34 accounts for, a 167 million increase in intermediate demand will be caused, as well as a $3.2 million increase in labor income across Mexico's 6 border states. Within the U.S., a 10-minute reduction in wait times will lead to 520,000 additional commercial monthly crossings, resulting in 547,000 extra monthly crossings by spending via families and individuals traveling from Mexico to the 4 U.S. border states every month. This model means that people spend an additional $256,000 in California alone, boosting the retail and clothing industry. Improvements in infrastructure and entry would prevent bottlenecks and decongest queues that regularly spill over into interstate highways and local roads from borders. Dollar et al. 02 states that a 10% increase in mean income per person is associated with a 26% decrease in the proportion of people living in poverty. When average income rises, the income per capita of the poorest fifth rises proportionally. Let's go to our second contention on human trafficking. Human trafficking is increasing across the southern border as Blackburn 23 finds destructive immigration policies exacerbated human trafficking at our southern border. Human smuggling is thriving and has expanded to over a $13 billion industry. In 2021, Human Trafficking Hotline reported 10,360 incidents, but the actual number is likely far greater than what has been reported. Luckily, recent tech allows us to detect and track victims easily, as Jones 20 indicates that traffickers move victims across borders using fraudulent documentation to avoid detection. Biometrics are a game changer, as encryption allows information to be transported across borders to detain individuals. Previous technology has been proven successful, as the IOJ-14 finds the new screening tool has been tested with victims and has been found to reliably predict victimization in those contexts. The DHS is dependent on emerging tech, so increased surveillance also means increasing innovation. Security 24 states that the southern border poses an existential risk. Emerging technology plays a critical role as the cutting edge technology is crucial to apprehending traffickers. We have the responsibility to our nation to use every technology at our disposal to combat the illegal movement of people. This is super important as the aftermath of human trafficking goes generational. Cron 21 finds that trauma from trafficking victimization continues via mental health conditions and dependence on substance abuse. These consequences can be long lasting and they impact the individual's interpersonal relationships. This results in the intergenerational cycles of victimization, starting with trafficking. Thus, you affirm.
All right. To introduce myself, I'm Ethan Mao on Winston Churchill, and we're on the negative. I'll be sending our speech document in chat right now. It's
Okay.
just a rhetoric. You can call for specific cards after my speech.
Could you just paste it in the doc share?
It's in that document.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wait.
It's just in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Is anyone not ready? Okay. Winston Churchill negates. Our sole contention is repeating mistakes. As Albert Einstein once said, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. Indeed, border surveillance is not new. Last month, the American Immigration Council reported that the US has spent nearly $500 billion on border security. However, Harvard University explains that even though the US always claims to have new technology, the border has only gotten worse. Deaths have reached record highs, doubling over 2 decades. Ron Mosley of MIT concludes that surveillance has historically failed to tackle the root problem, sinking tax dollars into unproven and invasive technology. With that, our first argument is the American economy. Illegal immigrants take jobs that Americans don't want, serving as a lifeline for US agricultural industry. The Forbes Institute in 2024 explains that the US needs 2 million agricultural workers per year to meet growing population demands. Illegal immigration makes up 80% of the newly hired workforce. In addition to the workforce, Time magazine in 2024 reports that immigration will increase US economy by $7 trillion over the next decade by boosting demands for goods, services, and housing. Thus, Cornell University explains higher undocumented workers directly correlates to lower food prices. Oppenheimer in 2024 further explains that undocumented immigrants help prevent recessions in general. Without illegal immigrants, inflation will hit record numbers. Unfortunately, an empirical study done by Texas University found when border security increases, immigrant workers and farm profitability drastically decreases. 20% of crops went unharvested. This creates an economic and agricultural disaster. Cambridge University explains since the US is the world's largest food exporter, any decrease in agricultural production will cause a domino effect, increasing food prices worldwide. Caldwell concludes increases in food prices will push 100 million people into extreme poverty. Our second argument is crushing cooperation. Mexico's new president Sheinbaum is determined to foster cooperation within the U.S. The Wilson Center last month explains Sheinbaum is less aggressive than previous presidents and supports better cooperation moving forward. Collaboration with Mexico is essential for tackling problems at the border. The USDS explains the U.S. requires Mexico to enhance security and promote rights and the rule of law on the southern border. U.S. surveillance requires Mexico's own investment to promote peace. Unfortunately, increasing surveillance destroys U.S.-Mexico relations in two ways. First is by harming migrants. Fletcher finds that Mexico strongly supports migrants entering the U.S. However, surveillance historically worsens exploitation and marginalization of migrant rights, going against Mexico's wishes. Secondly, surveillance is a one-sided decision. After years of U.S. failures, Mexico is skeptical of one-sided border policies. The Reuters Institute in 2023 explains Mexico urged the U.S. not to make one-sided decisions on the border. Unfortunately, increasing surveillance is a one-sided decision. Relations are key. The Center of Strategic International Studies explains maintaining a strong relationship with Mexico is key to solving countless global issues like national security and climate change, since Mexico and the U.S. share the same continent. In addition, Texas University concludes decreased relations destroy economic and security interests. Employment of 6 million Americans is tied to Mexico. Our third argument is tragic trade-off. The Financial Times in 2024 explained that Congress has already underfunded the Department of Homeland Security. An additional $500 billion poured into unnecessary surveillance means billions less invested into programs that actually benefit millions of people. For example, counterterrorism would be the first to be traded off. Homeland Security 17 explains that government historically reduced funding for counterterror by $582 million in order to construct southern infrastructure on the border, reducing terrorism detection by 74%. Additionally, even the threat of decreased funding would cause staff to leave. This means that even if funding doesn't actually go down, counter-terror programs will still decrease. Doubleday 24 explained that the counter-terror program historically lost 10% of its staff due to uncertainty about funding. Counter-terror programs are essential to prevent terrorists from attaining bioweapons. Kelly in 2024 warns that cutting these programs removes safeguards. We must stop terrorists from getting bioweapons, as Walsh in 2021 explains that bioweapons spread rapidly and lethally with the deadliest capable of wiping the planet. Thus we indicate. Are you all good for crossfire?
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Can I
Sure.
first question?
Yep.
All right. So, okay, I want to get a better sense of your agriculture contention, right? So you use this 20% statistic in terms of your empirics. Like when was that from? And like why did this happen?
Yeah, so I can send the evidence. I'm not sure what the specific date is off the top of my head. Let me just
Because I'm pretty sure it's like 2002. And I feel like there were definitely different policies going on at that point.
All right, let me just check when the evidence was from. Um, I'll send that to you after crossfire.
Okay, yeah, you're fine. You can take a question. I'll go
Yeah.
again.
On your argument about human trafficking, you say that human trafficking poses an existential risk. Why is that true?
So we give you a couple of things. First of all, we're saying that human trafficking is inherently really bad in the long term. And that happens for two key reasons. First, because of the generational nature of its impacts via drug abuse and interpersonal relationships. And second of all, because things like human trafficking and structural violence, sexual assault are historically always ignored. So when we prioritize large, flashy impacts over things like structural violence, that allows it to keep happening infinitely. And we never solve back to
How's
the
that existential? Existential means that like it's going to cause the human race to die. So how's that going to happen?
Right. I mean, like, first of all, our impact is not based on like mass extinction. That card was
But
just kind of
why
like,
is it existential?
we're using the card to like help you understand the mass impact and the gravity of the situation. If you
All
want
right.
to drop the card, we can drop the card. It's simply rhetoric.
All right, so just to clarify, it's not existential.
We're not, no, we're not
Okay,
saying
okay, got it. You can have a
extinction.
question. You
All
can have
right. Let's go to uh the cooperation argument, right? You
yeah.
say that we need cooperation between the United States and Mexico to help solve
Mhm.
climate change and security as well as economic
Yeah.
interests. What are times when decreased cooperation has actually had an impact on things like climate change? Like, is there a link there or empirics?
Yeah, so that's really obvious, right? The US and Mexico have to cooperate together to actually solve climate change. When you decrease relations, they're less gonna be able to like actually sign laws that like put set enforcement on things like climate emissions.
So
That's our
you're saying
argument.
that it's like critical specifically for the North American continent? Because I would say that it's really important that we have collaboration between countries like India and China, but not so much between the United States and Mexico. Like we have to look at the gravity of these situations.
Okay, so we would say that climate change is a global issue. You need cooperation between all countries to actually solve climate change. Right now, we already have cooperation with China and India, and now we just need to make sure we maintain these relations with Mexico. But can I
All
get a
right.
question?
We have like 10 seconds, but sure.
Yeah, on wait times, you say that we will lose $2 billion. How's that going to affect your big impact on
Has
like
that affect our big impact? We're saying that right now we lose $2 million in terms of border security, or not border communities from the loss of economic relations that they get via trade. That affects our big impact because they're literally losing income, and our impact is helping pull people out of poverty.
okay,
That's
that's
correct.
that's gross.
Okay, Judge, I'll take a minute of prep and then I'll begin as soon as I mute. In three, two, one. Okay. Wait, sorry. That was 110. Wait, I'll take 10 more seconds of prep. Okay. I'm ready to give first rebuttal. Let me pull up my timer and then give me a second. This is being weird. All right. I think I can, yeah. Off time roadmap first. I'll just go down my opponent's case, and then if time permits, I'll go down our case, and then a little bit of Wang. My time begins with my first word. Is everyone ready? Okay. First, on economy, we doubly outweigh. We tell you that X-rays at ports of entries are not invasive, and our cards prove that they work, as we've seen in the wait time reduction, saving billions of dollars. Next, we tell you that fortunately, non-intrusive scanning tech like X-ray technology improves the flow of traffic and crossing times decrease. And then our Chavez 23 card proves that more efficient U.S.-Mexico border has potential to reduce border crossings for commercial and non-commercial vehicles. And a 10-minute reduction creates thousands of Mexican jobs and grows the GDP for both U.S. and Mexico by billions. And next, their impact on food prices, we say two things. First, we say that the U.S. government has no incentive to tighten the United States-Mexico southern border to the point of self-destruction of its own agricultural industry. Next, we tell you that the agricultural industry is not strong now, and they have no probability for this impact triggering. Our Thomas 23 cards proves that the U.S. agriculture industry is projecting another strong year with elevated crop prices, and rebound from COVID-19 is expected to boost farmers, chemical suppliers, and grain traders. This can be dropped, and for AF, their impact will not trigger. Next, we say that H2A workers, who are seasonal agricultural workers, have increased by 64.6% in the past few years, inherently filling in. Agriculture is abusive to undocumented migrants without H2A protections. Now for cooperation. Surveillance actually benefits migrants. For hurting migrants, we say that it does the complete opposite by taking 26% of the lowest fifth demographic out of poverty, and we stop human trafficking as we prove solvency with biometrics. Next, they say that terrorism will happen if we implement surveillance, but we tell you that most terrorism is not committed by illegal immigrants, but most terrorist attacks that do occur are committed by homegrown terrorists, and we have to prioritize trafficking over all else. And next, we also delink this because immigration is not correlated with crimes, nor is it causal, and immigrants are less likely to commit crimes. We do not have to worry about terrorism in the status quo. Our card from Narrative 18 finds that immigrants are 50% less likely to commit crimes, 16% less likely to murder, and 77% less likely to steal than native residents, and do not take from the economy. Thus, terrorism is not a threat. Prefer our evidence, and we give you the percents. They give you no evidence for why cooperation with Mexico is necessary. They have no evidence or examples for why this is important for global warming solving, and this is not terminalizable. Agriculture is abusive and exploitative of undocumented migrants, and we solve with H2A workers. Next, they talk about climate change. But look, we non-unique this because Solomon, Platter, and Nutty and Friedlangston proves that climate change is irreversible for another 1,000 years. Climate change is largely irreversible for 1,000 years after emissions stop. Following cessation of emissions, atmospheric temperatures does not drop significantly for another 1,000 years. Then realize that on their first link, their impact should have triggered. And we'd say that the nature of the agriculture being like modern day slavery also exploits migrants. Judge, now we tell you that we have to extend and prioritize the most severe impacts in this round. As our Jones 20 card indicates that traffickers move across borders using fraudulent documentation to evade detection, and we prove that biometrics is an absolute game changer, allowing info to be transported across borders. With things like fingerprints, we can ensure identities and save civilians from these more severe impacts. The DHS and the southern border poses an existential risk, as our Security 24 card states. The aftermath of human trafficking goes generational. We have to prioritize these impacts over all else because trauma from trafficking and victimization contributes to mental health conditions, dependence on substance use, and the consequences are long-lasting, impacting the individual, interpersonal relationships resulting in intergenerational cycles of victimization. We have to prioritize these impacts. Now realize that our trade in econ contention solves back, and we effectively negate all of our opponent's contentions. Therefore, we are proud to affirm.
Okay, Judge, I'll be taking a couple of seconds of prep time starting now. Okay, that was 15 seconds of prep time. I'm just gonna write that down. The order of my speech will begin on my arguments and then move on to my opponent's arguments, starting with 2 overviews on my opponent's arguments. Is everyone ready? All right, great. Time starts now. On my first argument about the economy, my opponents say that they outweigh, but $7 trillion being lost is far greater than their $2 billion impact. Their second response is that they're going to reduce border crossings with surveillance. We completely agree. That's our whole argument. Their own argument literally concedes that border crossings will decrease, which means that the workforce will decline. Their third and fourth response are about agriculture, but that's not our argument. Our argument is also about the economy and how the economy would be ruined if illegal immigration is decreased. Furthermore, we'd also tell you that farm prices are down right now. Clearly, it's working. Their last response is that the H-2A program solves, but our evidence finds that H-2A is only enough for 4% of the required agricultural workers because there's tons of delays in getting the H-2A visa, and it's very costly in the first place. On my second argument about cooperation, my opponent's first response is that surveillance benefits migrants. One, Mexico views surveillance as bad for migrants, which is what our argument is. Second, they completely disregard our second warranting on about unilateral action. Surveillance is unilateral, which Mexico's new president really does not like. Their next two responses are both about climate change. First, our argument is not just about climate change. The US and Mexico cooperate on national security too. And second, it's pretty obvious as to why we need to cooperate with Mexico. We need to share ideas and technology in order to solve climate change. On our last argument about terrorism, my opponents say about trade-off. My opponents say that terrorists are my opponents only give you one response, that terrorists are homegrown. First, we would tell you that affirming actually increases homegrown terrorists. As UChicago explains, that surveillance assumes immigrants are a threat. By treating immigrants as a threat, they feel a sense of exclusion, increasing the threat that they get recruited to terrorist organizations. Not only does it increase the terror threat, it makes it harder to detect, as immigrant terrorists are already within the US. And second, our argument, we completely agree with this argument. The reason why terror is not likely now is because of the counter-terror programs. When you cut that, that's when terror becomes likely. Move on to my opponent's case. Start with two overviews. First, the US government faces obstacles to implement effective surveillance. For example, legal constraints funding and land acquisition in critical border areas. That disproves all their arguments, as these obstacles undermine feasibility and effectiveness of surveillance, meaning it won't decrease wait times or cartels. Second, their own evidence, Perez 24 admits that the US already has the technology to detect much of everything, but we don't have the personnel to enforce it. Thus, BPC finds that substantially increasing surveillance would be insufficient because it would overwhelm personnel. Without personnel, surveillance would be ineffective. On my opponent's first argument about trade. First, Mahoney 24 explains US-Mexico trade is surging, showing that wait times barely impact trade. Trade increased 2.5% per year. Second, surveillance increases wait times. Vasquez 24 finds X-ray surveillance is terrible and caused wait times to double. Even with substantial investment, scanning would destroy trade through delays from inspection queues, errors, and more. Always prefer our evidence. It's a historical analysis of over 50 countries and concludes that surveillance will reduce trade 31%, increase shipping times cost, reduce GDP 12%. Third, if trade gets so bad, trade will shift from freight to rail, pipeline, air, so the impact is offset. Four, it costs way more to build surveillance than it does for the trade impact. And lastly, the construction of surveillance itself would decrease trade. Ramirez explains CBP inspection to construction is expected to shut down lanes for 6 months. On my opponent's second argument about cartel trafficking. First, realize that biometric surveillance is really racist. It misdetects black faces a lot. Second, Panda 24 finds that Mexico is more peaceful than ever despite cartels. Third, there are 5 reasons why cartel surveillance won't stop cartels. First, smugglers can bribe border agents, meaning surveillance is ineffective. Second, Perez explains surveillance actually makes millions of migrants stuck at the border vulnerable to cartel human trafficking. This is empirical, so you prefer it over their hypothetical arguments. Third, cartels would go global. They have operations all around the world. That actually worsens the effect of cartels because other countries have even less restrictions, causing even more human rights violations. Fourth, Arnold finds that Mexico's most powerful cartels operate deep inside US territory, not on the border. That means border surveillance is not enough. And lastly, cartels have the technology to innovate. They historically built tunnels, etc., to bypass border surveillance. Lastly, they say their argument is intergenerational. All our arguments are as well, but if someone dies, all their future generations are completely gone. They have zero chance of recovering. If families die from terrorism, that's also trauma. In this round, all our impacts severely harm the people they talk about, and you should prefer our arguments at the end of the day for this reason. Thus, we urge a negative ballot. Is everyone ready for crossfire?
Hold on, let me pull out my timer real quick, and then I'll go ahead and take first question. We'll begin time in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so you talk about how migrants get recruited into terrorist organizations, right? How does this work?
Yeah, historically it does happen, but let me explain the reasoning. Surveillance assumes that immigrants are a threat. And by treating immigrants as a threat, they feel a sense of exclusion, increasing the chance that they get recruited to terrorist organizations. But regardless, you can just look historically.
Can I ask a follow-up real quick?
Yeah, sure.
Any empirics to prove that this so-called feeling of exclusion has empirically increased terrorism rates?
That's what our evidence suggests. Yeah,
Suggest-
and also radicalization of migrants.
You can take a question.
Okay. So let's go to your argument about cartels. Or actually, let's talk about your own evidence. Your own evidence admits that the US has the technology, but they don't have the personnel. So if we
Which part are you referencing?
your Perez evidence.
Perez 24?
Yeah.
Okay, let me pull it up real quick. And then what's the question?
So yeah, if there is no people to man the surveillance, how is surveillance going to be effective?
No, we are saying we're automating the surveillance with X-ray technology, as opposed to manually scanning each unit crossing the border. Like manually scanning, if we have X-ray surveillance, we prove that we absolutely expedite this process. And with precedents, we've proved that the times we did implement this, we save billions of dollars.
But we're not manually scanning right now, right? We are doing X-ray technology. It's just
No,
not.
we're not X-raying. We are not implementing
I'd like to
X-ray
see that
surveillance
evidence
on a
before.
wide enough scale in the status quo.
I'd
We
like to see that evidence
implement
after
it more
process.
broadly.
You can make a question though.
Okay, yeah. And then in your speech, let's go to your argument about cartels going global. What is your link for this happening?
Yeah, if cartels won't be able to human traffic or sell drugs in the US, they would have to find other markets. They're obviously not just gonna collapse. They're gonna find other ways to make profits. Therefore, they would always go global. They already have operations global. Clearly, they have the capability to do it. If they go global, there's less regulations, which means even more human trafficking, even more drug violations, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but like how would cartels go global is the question. Like,
Honestly, I'm not sure the specifics, but what our evidence suggests is that they already have operations. So again, they clearly have the capability, they clearly have the funding to go global.
didn't you mention only in the US, not globally?
No, they have drug operations all around the world. I can send you the evidence on that if you want.
Yeah, drop the card.
But also they could just ship like drugs across as well. We have 20 seconds left. Do you have another
Yeah,
question?
I'll take like a quick follow-up. So you talk about how like Mexico views surveillance as bad for migrants. Why?
Because it has historically increased things like human trafficking and also led to funneling migrants to more dangerous routes.
Does your card specifically say that?
Yeah, we can provide you evidence that says that.
Okay,
Could you provide the evidence that says that there's zero X-ray technology right now?
no, we didn't say that. We're saying that X-ray technology is not implemented broadly enough. We said that when it was implemented, we witnessed.
Oh, yeah. Can I still see the evidence, please?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, are we doing evidence exchange right now? Okay, I'll start prep as soon as like all the cards and stuff are in. Just Churchill, you guys can let us know when you're good, and then I'll start prep.
Yeah, just let me know when you guys send the card.
All right, it's in.
Where is it?
It's at the very bottom of the doc.
Oh, like in our section? Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, are we all good?
Yep.
I'll just take running prep. And I'll start time now. Okay, that was a minute 15 of oh, my bad. That was a minute 15 of prep. Yeah, I'm just gonna be collapsing and then frontlining, going on their case and Wang.
Can we make sure that we're keeping track of the prep being used, by the way, whether it's writing it down or putting it in chat?
Oh yeah, for sure. I can put that in chat real quick right now. So for neg rebuttal, that was a minute 10, and then for neg summary, that was minute 15.
Wait, I thought I got
We only have 15 seconds.
what?
We only use 15 seconds.
No.
Oh, my bad. That was for AF, not neg.
Oh,
Yeah.
I totally just flipped that. All right, are we good now? Okay. Sorry, let me just get my document back up. All right, we'll start time now. Judge, let's talk about the most important argument in this round. That is trafficking. We're telling you that in the status quo, traffickers are able to come through legal ports of entry by using fraudulent documentation. That makes it exponentially harder to track down trafficking victims. However, biometrics is the solution because what we're doing with biometrics is inherently identifying people as they come across the border, reducing the use of fraudulent data, and making it easier to track down and stop trafficking. They give you a couple of responses here. First, they tell you that biometrics is racist, but at the end of the day, biometrics has a 99% accuracy rate across men, women, Black, and white individuals. We're telling you that there's no race bias and it's more accurate than people in general. Then they tell you that Mexico is peaceful right now. We're not saying that Mexico is not peaceful. We're saying that there's human trafficking happening right now. 2022, there was 10,000 people being trafficked. Just because there's peace within Mexico, it doesn't have anything to do with our impact whatsoever. But then they tell you that people are going to bribe border agents. Yes, that is why we are specifically putting in biometrics so that so that border agents can't just be bribed to look the other way. This information is going to be uploaded to systems. It makes it infinitely harder for them to be bribed. But then even if you buy that, that wouldn't assume that these border agents would have to be bribed for every single person crossing the border. That is insane. But then they tell you that increased surveillance is going to mean that people are stuck at the border. No, we're telling you two things. First of all, biometrics is going to be more efficient than an individual person coming through and stamping all of your documents. And then you can use our other contention where we tell you that things like scanners are going to reduce delays. But then they tell that the most powerful people are deep within the United States and they are not coming across the border. And then they give you this tunnel response. There's a couple responses here. First of all, cartels are not adapting. You think they are. However, Paul 23 states that the most illicit substances are smuggled through POEs or ports of entry, contrary to common belief. That is because there are so many tools to detect the movement of illicit drugs between ports that make it a difficult problem. These same can be said for things like trafficking. They're going to go through actual ports of entry. Then they tell you that they're deep within the United States, but we would say biometrics solves for that too because biometrics isn't location specific. Then let's go to their case. A couple of things here. First, on agriculture, they tell you that agriculture is strong right now. We would say that two things. First of all, it doesn't really matter if agriculture is strong right now or not. But then we would say that we have evidence to detect that it isn't strong right now. Food prices are literally increasing. More people are falling into food insecurity. Then realize that H-2A workers solve that. They are seasonal workers that are coming into the United States to fill in. They tell you that H-2A workers only solve for 4%, but we would say they only need to solve for 4% right now. But if you make a need for H-2A workers, then farmers are going to be forced to hire them. That's why we've seen a 64% increase in the amount of H-2A workers recently. Then on cooperation, first of all, they tell you about harming immigrants. We would say that agriculture harms immigrants too. Mexico should be equally mad. Their impact should have triggered. Then on two-sided policy, we would say surveillance actually helps migrants, and every single impact they give has no precedent whatsoever on trade-off. They give you this homegrown terrorist thing, but we would say that there's no reason for people to, first of all, there's no empirical evidence, and two, there's no reason for people to feel more demonized or excluded because of increased trafficking. We would say you prioritize trafficking over all of their impacts because of these structural harms, thus you affirm.
All right, we're gonna be taking some prep time, and that prep time will start in All right, that's the rest of our prep time. It's going to be going over our arguments and theirs. Time starts now. They respond to agriculture, but not the economy. Increasing surveillance will destroy the economy by decreasing undocumented migrants. Illegal immigrants boost demand for goods, services, and housing, ultimately contributing $7 trillion in the next decade. This is the most important argument for two reasons. First, undocumented immigrants help prevent recessions, which would have global impacts due to economic interactivity, pushing 100 million people into extreme poverty where they die of cold and hunger. Realize they have no numbers. Would you rather save 100 million over a hypothetical benefit? Second, maintaining a healthy economy is necessary to address the issues my opponent argued for. For example, if undocumented migrants and the economy declines, we won't have the resources to solve for trafficking. In order to solve for their arguments, you need to vote for us. Even then, let's just respond to these agricultural responses. They say HOA solves, but no, our evidence postdates, which finds that it only solves for 4%. You can't just change the HOA program. It's too costly and too ineffective. Now let's look into our argument about trade-off. It's really simple. They completely concede this argument. The only thing they say is that there's no precedence of our argument happening. The reason why terror isn't probable right now is because of the counter-terror programs. And second, we do have precedence in empirics. Because surveillance costs $500 billion, it historically reduced funding by 582 million and decreased terrorism detection by 74%. And even if funding doesn't decrease, the potential threat of funding decreasing historically reduced staff by 10%. Without staff, counter-terror programs can't operate. This would be deadly. Counter-terror programs are the only thing stopping terrorists from getting bioweapons. Without counter-terror, terrorists would get biological weapons, which spread and kill quicker than anything and potentially wipe out the planet. We also give you the evidence that terrorists historically become homegrown because they become radicalized as a result of surveillance because they feel excluded. All these empirics go conceded. Weighing is simple. Funding happens immediately when you affirm to get contracts. Their arguments require years of constructing, contracting, and resources. On their arguments, they just don't address two of our overviews. It ends around. First, the US government faces obstacles to implement effective surveillance infrastructure because of legal hurdles. The Baker Institute reports that legal constraints, funding, and land acquisition challenges prevent the US from building surveillance in critical border areas. This means that cartels can just traffic across the areas that don't have surveillance because they can't be implemented there. And second, their own evidence, Perez 24, admits that the US already has the technology to detect these border human trafficking, but there's just no personnel, which means that even if you increase surveillance, there's no one to man it, which means that it won't be effective. Third, they don't address that cartels will go global. The Heritage Foundation in 2023 explains that Mexico's cartels have operations all around the world. Surveillance on the border alone is not enough to weaken cartels. What this means is that cartels will just traffic people in other countries with even less regulations, which actually magnifies their impacts. It will just lead to more trauma. And lastly, cartels have the technology to innovate past surveillance. When you look empirically, they just jam all the cameras and just bypass the surveillance. Historically, it doesn't work. Lastly, they say their argument is intergenerational. Ours is too. When someone dies, that's a lot of trauma. In this round, all of our impacts severely harm the people affected. Thus, you should prefer the amount of people who are actually affected. Thus, we urge a negative ballot.
All right, are we ready for cross?
Yep.
Cool, go ahead.
All right, y'all can have first question.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's talk about the overview stuff, right? You say that Perez 24 states that there's no personnel to man these security things. Can you tell me exactly what kind of security Perez is talking about in this card?
This is your own evidence.
Yeah, I know. I think you're misunderstanding it, so I want to see what you think.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
It's
we read a quote from your evidence.
We read a quote from your evidence that says the US already has technology that detects so much, but we don't have the personnel to actually enforce it.
It's the very last.
Right. So the Perez card is talking specifically about things like scanners, and when they say we have the ability to detect so much, it's things like drugs, right? That was clean conceded. That had nothing to do with our second contention. Then we say that biometrics are being implemented, which don't need personnel, and Perez is completely unrelated.
How are they gonna catch the traffickers?
If they don't have personnel.
The traffickers.
Okay,
so what we're saying right now is that we don't need more personnel to catch the traffickers, because the way that traffickers are getting in the status quo is fraudulent documentation. If you have the same amount of people, but instead of checking documents, they're checking biometrics, it's easier for them to not get swindled by these traffickers. And then
not true, because your Perez evidence says the US has the technology to detect criminal organizations. That's literally what your Perez evidence says. But the fact is that they don't have the personnel.
So like what
Perez is talking about drugs. Even if we don't have the technology to track down drugs, it's different for trafficking because the link the workers get in is different.
Okay, first you should have addressed this in your last speech, and second, we would say that even this also applies to your trafficking argument, right? If biometrics can like identify these like people being trafficked, then there won't be any personnel to actually enforce that, right?
Okay, so two things. First of all, this wasn't addressed in the last speech because you read it as a response in our C1 and we collapsed on
No,
C2.
we read it as an overview, which applies to your whole case.
Regardless, the evidence doesn't make any sense. C1 got dropped. But then we would say that it's completely different because you're not talking about going and tracking down people. You're talking about letting people into the
Yeah.
country. You need the same amount of personnel. Can I take a question?
No,
Or you can take a question, actually.
yeah,
That was
I thought you just took one. All right, let's actually talk about this, right? So let's talk about our other overview if you don't like our second one, right? So our overview talks about how people can just traffic across places where surveillance isn't implemented.
Yeah.
How
So
does increasing
we
surveillance?
actually, yeah, so we respond to this in a couple of ways. First, we give you the ports of entry card where we tell you that that drug traffickers, cartels, people who are smugglers are primarily entering through ports of entry. And that happens for
Okay.
a couple key reasons. First of all, that happens because there's so much technology between ports of entry to help detect them that it's actually preferable to go through legal means. And
All right,
then
so wait, if I could clarify my question, right? So
Alright.
yeah, so why wouldn't cartels just switch the places where surveillance can't be
Yeah,
implemented?
it's gonna
right,
be
It's gonna be a lot easier that way.
a lot easier for them to get. Well, we let you
Can I
finish.
just answer because Cross is going to end real quick? I'm so sorry, but I would say that right now they're actually de-incentivized from going between ports where there would be no cameras because there's so much more personnel and so much more thought we've put into it. But then empirically, we see them continuing to go through ports of entry no matter how much surveillance we put in. So that's why biometrics is inherently useful.
So just switch the places where surveillance is implemented, but that's Cross.
Yeah, that's Cross.
Okay, I believe I have like 30 seconds to I mean, no, I have 35 seconds of prep. I'll take all my remaining prep. Ava, you got time? Okay. I'll begin as soon as I vote mute in 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm good. Wait, mute. Okay. I'll take a quick off-time roadmap. I'll go down voters, their case, our case. Judge, you have to consider we have a clean way to the ballot that is trafficking, and the status quo traffickers come through legal ports of entry, and we need biometrics to solve. We tell you that we have to prioritize the most severe impacts like sex trafficking, child trafficking, and multi-generational impacts. They try to respond by saying we don't have the manpower, but automation of surveillance frees up manpower. Instead, we solve cartel existence. We solve the root cause through trade by taking people out of poverty. We boost the economy of both countries and take people out of poverty, and they tell you that cartels always adapt, but even though we increase surveillance, cartels always come through ports of entries anyways. We tell you that we have to prioritize cyclical impacts. We give you long-term solvency that you have to prioritize. Now they talk about terrorism, but they have no probability for this. They are suggesting migrants, which we proved are peaceful, will become terrorists because X-ray scanners and ports of entries make them feel oppressed. And then now on this will not happen. Now on cartels, we solve back completely for cartels because cartels will not exist if there are no people to join them. We prove that if when we take people out of poverty, we solve long-term. They have jobs, so no cartels. Now they say that our cars don't we don't have enough manpower to man our infrastructure, but we tell that X-ray automation means less manpower and intuitively reduces the need for manpower. And now, where are econ impacts from trade productivity? They tell you that our biometric software is it doesn't require building its software base, so therefore this doesn't stand as well under their framework. Now we say that our econ impacts in trade productivity outweigh because increase combined GDP by 1.34%, create more than 3,000 additional jobs in Mexico, and take 26% of the lowest demographic out of poverty. We are winning for the benefiting underprivileged people. This is a clear, easy place to vote. You need to prioritize human trafficking over econ for a few key reasons. Sexual violence systemically ignored in policymaking in favor of bigger, flashy impacts. By voting on drugs, we ignore and exacerbate this dangerous cycle that goes clean to conceded. Our impacts are generational. When someone is trafficked, they turn to drugs and have poor mental health, affecting their family, children, and future generations. Violence is insecure. Severity, torture from trafficking is uniquely traumatic. They say themselves that it's akin to slavery and often include sexual violence. Now in cooperation, we went on this because they have no reasoning, no precedence for why Mexico would cease cooperation with the U.S. You have no justified warranty for their impacts triggering. Drop this contention. Therefore, this all goes to us, and we are proud to affirm. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we don't have any prep time left. The order of my speech will just begin on my arguments and move on to my opponent's arguments. Is everyone ready? All right. This round is simple. Both sides are intergenerational, but when people die, all the future generations are gone. When a terrorist attack happens, it leaves people with psychological harm. Thus, you should be voting on the most amount of people affected. You're voting on our third argument about trade-offs. They don't say a single thing in their last speech or summary. As a judge, you know that it was 100% conceded. Because surveillance costs $500 billion, surveillance historically reduced funding by $502 million and decreased terrorism detection by 74% and reduction in staff by 10%. Without stuff, counter-terror programs can't operate, and that would be deadly because counter-terror programs are the only thing stopping terrorists from getting bioweapons. Without counter-terror, terrorists would get biological weapons which spread quicker and kill quicker and could wipe out the planet. The weighing is simple. They have conceded that we outweigh on time frame. Funding happens immediately when you affirm in order to get the contracts, whereas their arguments require years of construction, contracting, and resources. This means that intervening actors solve back, and it also short circuits their argument based on sequencing. You can't die twice. Extinction physically can't happen twice. Second, their only weighing mechanism is against the economy, not this argument. We're completely winning this argument. Now let's look at my opponent's arguments. Our two overviews go unaddressed until their last speech. First, the U.S. government faces legal obstacles, funding obstacles, and land acquisition problems in order to build surveillance in critical areas. They just say that trafficking comes through legal ports of entry. That makes no sense. If these areas are without surveillance, even if cartels can go through legal ports, they would just go to the places where surveillance isn't implemented because of legal problems. Therefore, trafficking will still occur because surveillance will not be placed at crucial checkpoints. Second, their own evidence admits that we have the technology, but we don't have the personnel. They just say it's automated. One, there's a new response, and second, you need personnel to catch the traffickers in the first place. Even if we have all the surveillance, we're not going to be catching anyone. Third, they can see that cartels will always go global. They already have operations all around the world, and that's overall worse because other countries don't have any regulations surrounding human trafficking, overall worsening their argument. Overall, our main idea is that surveillance historically fails, and you should be negating in today's round. All right, great round, everyone, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job, guys.
Yeah, good job.